Hi, everyone. This is on, yes. Thank you, Christina, for that wonderful welcome. And thank you for the organizers. This is an amazing venue, and thank you for the glass of champagne. It's really taken the edge off my jet lag here. Okay, this is on. Now, in my jet-lagged state, I was kind of thinking about my talk title, How Novice Tech Users in West Africa Respond to Your Fancy CSS. And I kind of realized that it maybe sounds a little bit belligerent. It's definitely like a bit of a stank in there. But I am actually very excited to be here, and I don't want this to be a very strict lecture about what you shouldn't do. And I hope that at the end of this talk, you'll be as excited about making products for people in the developing world as I am. So hi, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. My name's Ellie Long. I'm L-E-L on Twitter, and most other places on the internet. There's actually no goats in this talk, by the way. I think you've misled the audience on what to expect. So I'm a product designer and a front-end developer. And I haven't lived here for a while, but I do come from Melbourne. So I'm really, really happy to be giving this talk in Melbourne because this is really where my career began, where my love of CSS began. But I've come quite a long way from home since then. So I worked as a designer and developer in Melbourne. I worked with a lot of great people, and we did really cool stuff. And I love CSS. I loved, when I started, figuring out the cool things you could do with it. And as CSS itself developed, I loved, all the effects and the animations that we could create. And then I moved abroad. I've worked in agencies in Berlin. I've worked at Eden Schwiekemann and at Color Bright. And in these places, we really kind of cranked up the cool stuff to a whole new level. And it was really, really fun working at these places. We did a lot of exciting work for a lot of exciting clients. And they wanted really cool stuff. They wanted the latest and greatest. They wanted the shiniest stuff, like the most cutting-edge stuff. We did a lot of work for Red Bull and Red Bull Music Academy, for Ableton, yours truly, Font Shop, and a lot more. So we did really great work, creating these really immersive experiences to delight their customers. But a few years ago, I changed direction a bit. Now I'm working for an NGO called eHealth Africa. So we get funding from organizations like the Gates Foundation, UNICEF, the Center for Disease Control, to work on programs, public health programs, and emergency outbreak response in West Africa. So the things that we build at eHealth Africa are very different from the kinds of things that I used to build for clients like Red Bull. The problems that we're trying to solve are not customer engagement or selling products. There are problems like the Ebola virus and polio, sleeping sickness, vaccine delivery, maternal health, and a lot more. So when I was working in agencies, field work used to mean going to London for Red Bull music events. And user research was hanging out with music industry people. Field work now is very, very different. It means piling onto the back of a motorcycle or into a four-wheel drive and accompanying teams of vaccinators and other kinds of health workers to really remote settlements in West Africa, visiting health facilities like this, which are very, very different from the kinds of health facilities that you find in Australia or in Germany. They're often, 3 walls and no roof, no power, no electricity. They might have a working cold box for vaccines, and sometimes a small ambulance. So this context meant I needed to take a very different approach to designing and building products. This was really human-centered design to a degree that I'd never experienced before. So my focus really had to switch from how cool can we make this to how do we make this as useful as possible in what are sometimes very, very critical situations. So I want to quickly tell you a little bit more about some of the apps that we've worked on. So we were part of quite a few Ebola response initiatives. One example was an app that health workers used to keep track of people in Liberia and Sierra Leone. So we would keep track of people who had contact with people who had Ebola. So these health workers doing this contact tracing were an incredibly important part of this Ebola response. And their job was to travel from settlement to settlement, looking for and keeping track of anyone who had come into contact with someone who had Ebola. So these health workers, they used this app to follow up on people, to record their details, to record any symptoms that they might have, and their location. So this meant that we could pull in all this data. We could see the positions of all the infected people and all the at-risk people on maps. Another project we work on is to send out teams on polio vaccination campaigns in remote communities in northern Nigeria. So Boko Haram actually control a lot of the northeast of Nigeria, and they have declared polio vaccinations as a Western conspiracy to sterilize Muslims. So a lot of these areas are very, very inaccessible. But these teams of vaccinators would stop at every household that they could access. They would administer the vaccine to any children they could find. And we captured a lot of this geolocation data while they were at this. And we mapped out these previously unmapped, unknown areas. And we built a dashboard to see where the black spots were and where the resources were needed. We've also worked on programs to renovate health facilities in Guinea. So these are places that had no water, no electricity, a lot of very basic services, plenty of motorcycle parking sometimes. And we created a system to replace these paper-based books that they had, so that health workers there could report data about the kinds of diseases and incidences that occurred there. So that nationally you could know how many people had malaria or were showing Ebola symptoms, or how many people died and how many people were born. We also made an app that health workers use when they go out into the remote jungles of Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, and they would test people for African sleeping sickness. So this is a very easily treatable disease that's actually fatal if it is left untreated. So this app registered the details of the peoples in the villages, and it guides the health workers through this process of the various tests that they need to do to confirm a diagnosis. And we also created an accompanying dashboard app to analyze all this data that they brought back with them and to be able to plan where they send people. So I think you can probably see there's a bit of a pattern here. We do a lot of mobile apps that we send out with health workers to collect data, and then we usually have a dashboard to accompany them to analyze this stuff. So what is the typical African user like? Well, there's no real typical user in Africa, just like there's no real typical Australian user. I've encountered people across a really broad spectrum of experience and level of comfort and knowledge with digital products. And a lot of people in West Africa are actually very, very comfortable using phones and computers and tablets and laptops, all sorts of digital interfaces. Uh-oh, Ben. My presentation's broken. Is Ben here? I might skip ahead to a few non-broken screens. So a lot of people are very comfortable. They have like multiple devices, multiple smartphones. They use like multiple SIM cards to maximize the amount of coverage they have on what are generally pretty shitty cellular networks. I actually had a taxi driver in Nigeria that had like 3 different phones plus a separate music device, and he was using all of them at the same time. I live to tell the tale. And you know, I have colleagues as well in Guinea who that are like bigger Apple fanboys, fan people, as I am. Hello. My images are broken.
Okay, I'll look.
So yeah, I certainly don't want to give the impression that that everyone in Africa is like confused by this shiny new technology. Maybe it was just a few slides that are broken. Cool. Thanks anyway. Thanks for nothing. Anyway, so the type of person that I do want to talk to you about, though, is like the novice tech user that we encountered quite a lot of these people on a lot of the projects I was working on. So these are people that had never used a smartphone before, never used a desktop or a laptop computer. There are people who had to go from using pen and paper to do their work to using an app. If they weren't completely new to it, then they were often relatively new to it. They were very recently introduced to digital technology. So they probably got their first phone at a place like this, at a street market, and it was probably something very cheap, probably secondhand, and probably also a knockoff, like just a fake Chinese Blackberry. And they would have taken it home to their house that might not have had power. So they would have had to charge it via a generator or on a car battery, or they would have had to walk to a relative's house to charge it. Or maybe they had to pay someone who'd set up a charging station. So I think you kind of get the picture. I mean, we're making apps for people who live in a very different kind of environment to the one we have here. So I want to talk a little bit about how this kind of influenced our process. And we always had to kind of start with the sort of devices that we'd see. So smartphones usually look something like this. These Huawei Chinese phones are very, very common. And they often have, you can't see it too well in this picture, but they have like glare protection and often very rugged covers. They're almost always Android phones, and they're almost always very cheap hardware. So we have Huawei and Lenovo, LG. You do see some Samsung devices, but they're like higher end. And Apple or iOS devices you see very, very rarely, but very occasionally. They're quite a status symbol. So you get some real workhorses. You don't see the many, like sleek, naked iPhones around. They often have very scratched up screens, or they're very protected. They have like these protection covers and big rugged cases. There's a whole box of rugged up tablets. They're probably not going to be connected a lot of the time. And this is either because there just is no coverage. There's very little coverage in remote areas of West Africa. And broadband's very, very uncommon. Or because the data is actually really expensive compared to in proportion to your average income. So where possible, it is really great to be able to build in some kind of offline first functionality. And this is where we always start with the work that we do. This was such an awesome picture, too. They're going to be really hard to charge. So I'm sure everyone knows this particular feeling of panic where, you get the 10% battery warning. Well, you can imagine seeing that low battery warning pop up, but the nearest place you can charge your phone is an hour's walk away. One of the health facilities that we renovated recently in Guinea, we put solar panels on the roofs, and when I visited them, every single one that had solar panels had a device plugged into every power point in this health facility charging. But it does take longer to charge a phone that way. So a generator will take maybe 2 hours to charge a phone. Solar panels it'll take twice as long to charge. It'll take 4 or 5 hours to charge. So if your app or your website sucks up battery life with some fancy bullshit, then you're going to make someone walk for an hour to charge their phone again. Now, we've always found that touch screens are easier for people to use than laptops. We recently trialed a program where we gave health workers laptops rather than tablets to do their reports, and it was way, way slower. So most people have been introduced to technology via smartphones, and using a laptop or a desktop with inputs that are very disconnected from the screen is very unintuitive, very slow to type. So what you actually see on the screen. If it's not on the screen, then you're in trouble. Now, I know you probably all thought that we'd moved on from this, like, everyone knows how to scroll kind of thing. People don't know how to scroll. It's actually a really unintuitive thing for novice users. So anything that's off canvas, anything that you have to scroll for, off canvas navigation, these sort of patterns are very, very difficult to use. So I want to take this example. This is dummy content based on an actual app that we have in use. It's quite a simple form. It asks for some rudimentary identifying details for a person, but it's quite deceptively simple. How do you know that there's more stuff below the edge of the window here? Where's the button to go forward or to go backwards? And we only know this stuff because we just know it. It's obvious. And it's only really obvious because we already know it. We've had years of evolution of digital interfaces to get used to this kind of stuff. And this doesn't even show any validation errors, which brings up a whole new level of complexity. And with every validation error, people lose confidence and they get frustrated. So an alternative method, one that we've had some success with, is to get people to input data in a sort of wizard-style interface. So one main thing per screen. And this seems a bit tedious to people who are very comfortable. It might seem a bit slower. But, we'd much rather have more tech-savvy people complain about it being a bit tedious than to have novice tech users have no idea how to use it. So we broke down the interface to one main task or action per screen. So you ask for a name, and then you're asked for a date of birth. It takes a kind of form of a question and answer style of interface. It's a much more natural sort of mechanism. And we wanted to get people doing things with as little training as possible, so that people are focused on their work and not on learning how to use an interface. And on a similar kind of note, you avoid concealed elements at all costs. So the prime example here is a select tag, which there's a lot of stuff hidden here. This is really not great resolution, but so this is a very common kind of task for us. Health workers go out to a location and they have to choose, they have to tell the app where they are. And this usually has some kind of hierarchy, like a province, a zone, an area. And the most obvious way to do this is to have select tags. And then that populates the subsequent select tags based on what they've chosen before. But it's very confusing. All of this stuff is then hidden away behind things that you have to click on or tap on. And changing a selection further down the tree means that it resets all of the stuff that you've already input. And a lot of people all over the world have trouble with select tags. This is really not specific to West Africa. So this is the alternative that we came up with. So this is an app. This is 3 separate screens in the workflow. And we ask them where they are, and we show them all the possible options. And we use very clear labeling to tell them what to do. We say tap on the option, on the place where you are. That's it in use. It's really important to have really good affordance. So if things can be pressed, make them look like they can be pressed. These real-world metaphors really help people understand how to use an interface. So make a button look bigger and clickier, and if it looks slightly raised, like it has shadows and it stands out in an otherwise flat screen, this really suggests the idea that people should push it. And language as well really plays an important part in guiding people through these interfaces. It really directly communicates that you can click on something, tell people what to do. And combining icons with very descriptive labeling is also very helpful. So you can see the difference here between these 2 buttons. We've become very conditioned to accept this button on the left as a button. This is a very kind of popular flat UI style button. But a lot of people don't have this conditioning, and to them, this button on the right looks like something that they can press on. Looks very, very obvious. And speaking of clicking, people will probably click on everything just to see what it does. And particularly in a flat UI, pretty much everything looks like it could be a button. So people will press on everything just to see what it does. So it's generally a good idea to build in some sort of undo actions or warnings, confirmation dialogues, particularly for destructive actions like this. So if someone presses on delete records, then give them a very clear idea of what will happen. Give them an option to go back. Animations are actually really interesting because they can go either way. Sometimes they can really hinder a user's actions. So especially when it comes to inputting data or completing tasks. This is an example of a UI, material UI form element, which is very commonly used on Android now. And it has some really fantastic documentation on how to use motion and animation to show how an app is organized and what it does. But it really fails when it comes to form inputs. So these focus animations really in no way hint at what should happen when you complete this gesture. It doesn't depict the natural movement, inspired by forces in the real world. This is, certainly not what happens when I use a pen and paper. And where animations actually really shine is where they describe a spatial model, where they tell the user if they're going forwards or backwards or up or down. So this, for example, is there's a static kind of transition between two screens. You hit continue and you go to the next one. Something that actually really helps people understand where they are in an app is just a very simple transition element, so they're going left or right. Consistency is really, really important. If you have UI and navigation elements that are generally in the same place and act the same way, then they're going to really help people just learn how to use your app by memorizing it. And in this way, even people who are not very literate, maybe not literate at all or very low literacy, they can often use these apps just by rote memorization of where things are and how they work. So if you use a forwards and backwards pattern here, at the bottom, forward and back, then don't disturb that pattern in a different place by putting a back action somewhere else. And don't be afraid to inject a little bit of fun. I wouldn't go so far to call this gamification exactly, but giving users a sense that they're achieving something, that they're making progress, is you can really have a little bit of fun there, I think. When we're asking people to register the details of thousands of people, some sense that they're getting somewhere with that is really, really helpful. And if you're ever in doubt, you can always steal or borrow. There are certain apps that pretty much everyone in Africa is using. There's no surprises here, the Facebook and WhatsApp and Gmail. So if you're in doubt, you can look at these apps and look at the navigation and the UI patterns that they use and emulate them. So nearly every health worker that we provided with a phone or a tablet, they either immediately or eventually proceeded to download WhatsApp and Gmail and Facebook. And Facebook really knows that this is sort of where it's at. They know that this is where the next billion users in the world are. Their Messenger app already has over 1 billion users, and their Messenger Lite, which is the lightweight version that uses less data and sucks up less battery life, they're really aiming for the next billion with this. So the projects that I've shown you today, they're in a very much a public health context, but the lessons from this are not limited to that context. This is really where the next billion users are. These emerging economies present a huge opportunity and huge new audiences. And like everyone else in the world, African consumers are very demanding and informed once they become familiar with the technology. And despite being relative newcomers to this kind of digital technology, they want the same things. They want clear, reliable, very smooth running mobile solutions. And the things that matter to us here, in Europe and in the US, these same things matter to the people in Africa as well. They just have to be much more creative about how they access it. So they want to communicate, they want to connect, they want to listen to music, they want to take photos. I've never taken so many selfies as when I've been in Africa. And these resource-constrained environments, as they're called, they can teach us a lot as designers and as makers. They teach us to strip back everything to what is really, really essential. They teach us to know our users and to try and make things that are really useful to them. Things that you want them to be able to use and to be able to enjoy, and not what you think is beautiful or cool or shiny. And you don't have to go to Nigeria or to Guinea or to the Congo to discover this or for it to be useful to you. These are just the basic principles of good design: to have empathy, to have curiosity. And this is just a very exacerbated context here, but we're all human and we all want the same things. Thank you for listening.